Hey everyone, it's Zach Beck. Bipartisan support continues to grow for a $908 billion piece of legislation that was recently put forward by a group of moderate senators. Now, this economic relief proposal is gaining support from individuals such as President-elect Biden, who is encouraging Congress to pass it before year's end. And what it does is this piece of legislation bridges the divide between the HEALS Act, which was a $500 million proposal put forward by Senate Republicans, and the HEROES Act, which is a $2.2 trillion piece of legislation put forward by House Democrats. Now, what we are finding is this new piece of legislation will renew various federal programs that were originally part of the CARES Act passed back in March, such as Paycheck Protection Programs, rental assistance, as well as funding for state and local government. One key ingredient is missing in this bill, and that is a second stimulus check. So far, we do not have that as part of this piece of legislation, but we already have legislators on both sides of the aisle saying they will not vote for it unless it does have a second stimulus check that will benefit millions of people, such as individuals watching this video right now. So what I want to do in this video is break down in detail what this new proposal is, what it would mean for you personally, how we got here to begin with, and what we should be doing right now to prepare for the future so we make sure that 2021 is a heck of a lot better than 2020. So let's take our time, dive into the details, and jump into it right now. As previously mentioned, this proposal is gaining support from key leaders in Congress, such as Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and like I said before, President-elect Biden. So what they're finding is that this is actually a possible compromise that could be reached before year's end. What's important to be aware of is the federal government is due to expire with all of their funding on December 11th. So they're planning to include this piece of legislation as part of a funding bill for the federal government as a whole. So passage of this bill could happen as quickly as this upcoming week. Therefore, it's important for you to know what is in this bill and how it affects you personally. And the first thing to be aware of is this new proposal does include extension of unemployment benefits. Back when CARES Act was passed in March, we found that they issued an additional $600 a week for individuals to receive unemployment benefits. Then when that expired, President Trump then actually issued an executive order that extended those benefits at $300 a week through the end of the year. This new proposal would actually allow these unemployment benefits to be extended for another 4 months. So hopefully getting us until the spring, when hopefully vaccines have been issued and we will find our economy beginning to pick up steam again because people are vaccinated and we're in a bit of a safer space than we are right now. So these unemployment benefits should continue if it passes. So right now, if you're an individual receiving unemployment benefits, this is a very important point to be aware of. Another crucial component of this bill is $300 billion allocated to the Paycheck Protection Program. Now, this was a very popular component of the CARES Act, which allowed businesses to continue to keep people on their books and pay their employees without having to lay them off. And what we're seeing right now is a whole new slew of new closures coming, specifically here in the state of California, where restaurants, salons, and gyms and all these other places are having to close yet again. And those employers are trying to figure out a way to keep their employees on the books while they can still pay them, but they cannot do so if they continue to have to close. Now, your thoughts on closures or not, I don't want to get into that too much in detail. I just want to say that unless you have some funding mechanism to actually support these businesses who need to pay their employees, it's very difficult to issue closures without doing so. So I'm really hopeful that they at least pass this portion of the bill to allow individuals who are employed to continue to get paid, but also importantly to allow the business owners to keep their businesses afloat during this challenging time where the government is telling them to close right now and not allowing them to continue to make money. Obviously, it's understandable because of the public health protections that need to be put in place, but without solid scientific evidence and without a full understanding of what all of this means related to the pandemic, it's important that we at least keep all these businesses afloat and keep these employees paid so that way they can continue to pay their rent, pay the groceries, keep a roof over their head, and do everything they need to move forward. So this new bill would allow this to continue by issuing a $300 billion towards the Paycheck Protection Program. On that note, I believe it's important for us to be aware of what our elected representatives do when it comes to closing people down or keeping businesses open. Now, we have had various approaches to this from state to state because we live in a federalist society where different states get to make different rules, which is quite wonderful and one of the benefits of living in the United States of America. But what we're finding is that some of these states have taken a more heavy-handed approach, and not to say that's necessarily a bad thing because they're in a difficult situation trying to make sure they're making wise decisions that protects the health of individuals, make sure our hospitals hospitals don't get overrun, making sure that people are safe and secure, at least as we get through this pandemic. But we really have to consider the livelihood of so many individuals out there who need their jobs to keep things afloat. So it's this delicate balance that our elected representatives have to deal with. So my encouragement to you is that depending upon what state or city that you live in, who your governor is, who your congressional representative, who your mayor is, try and stay in touch with them, try and encourage them to be making wise decisions when it comes to this particular issue of how to handle the pandemic, of balancing the public health interests of individuals with also the economic interests of trying to keep businesses afloat and keep people paid so they can make sure they're keeping roofs over their head and food on their table. When the CARES Act was passed back in March, it established a nationwide ban on evictions for people unable to pay their rent or their mortgage due to the pandemic. Now, when this expired, President Trump signed an executive order that extended it through the end of the year. So what we found is that individuals, fortunately, have not had to pay their rent or their mortgage during this time if they were unable to afford it. One thing to be aware of is that this was not forgiveness of your rent or forgiveness of your mortgage. It was forbearance, meaning that it was basically kicking the can down the road. So what we're finding is that we're basically heading to this cliff at the beginning of 2021 where millions of people are going to have to not only begin paying their rent for what they owe in January, but also the back payments prior to that. So what we're finding in this new piece of legislation is additional funding for rental assistance. Now, the bill isn't specific enough to understand what that means and who would be eligible and how much money would be afforded to individuals to be able to pay their rent or even if they pay their back rent, but it does say that it's going to address this issue, and my anticipation is that they would probably, in addition to that, try and find some way to continue these eviction moratoriums moving forward, as many local municipalities and local cities have done so. Therefore, if you are in a situation right now where you've been relying on this eviction moratorium to not have to pay your rent or your mortgage during the last number of months, I just want to encourage you that if you have the financial means to do so, it would probably be wise to consider making those payments as soon as you possibly can to make sure you don't fall behind the 8 ball, because even if they have a rental assistance program that goes into place and there's funding available, who knows how long it is going to take for them to issue that amount of funding, and also more importantly, if you end up not being eligible or not receiving that funding to begin with, the longer you wait, the bigger the bill is going to be that you're going to owe your landlord or your mortgage provider. So it's just something to be aware of. You need to make the decision that is best for you given your financial circumstance, but you just want to make sure you don't get yourself too deep in a hole where you're unable to afford paying it, because the next steps after that are even more dire. From a public health perspective, this new bill does address certain issues related to contact tracing as well as vaccine distribution and testing for the pandemic. So what we're finding is that they allocate $16 billion to help distribute the vaccine, to deal with contact tracing as well as additional testing. So that funding could be very valuable, especially in these critical months that we're finding where cases are spiking and individuals are finding themselves in even a more precarious position in our country than we were during the course of this pandemic. So it's important to note that Congress is looking to take some sort of action to try and provide some funding to get some of these programs in place to help us with a better framework moving forward, so hopefully we can return to some semblance of normalcy long term. Another interesting element of this proposal is it sets a 6-month moratorium against lawsuits associated with the pandemic against schools, organizations, businesses, and other entities when it comes to individuals who may have contracted the pandemic because they were attending or participating at one of those different organizations. Now, this piece of legislation is a bit controversial and it is a bit of a sticking point right now, but it is something that the Republican side has been very firm on and saying they want that in there. And it's understandable to say that perhaps the financial implications of remaining open and having someone sue you are very significant. So it's not necessarily going to be the long-term solution to this, because obviously businesses, organizations, schools, and entities want to keep people safe. But what you're going to find is that this allows there to be more time for local municipalities, local states to be able to determine what type of laws they want in place when it comes to dealing with this particular level of lawsuits. Schools have been hard hit by the pandemic, having to revert to remote learning, having to open their schools, close their schools, deal with the implications associated with trying to keep their students engaged, and also dealing with the stress associated with trying to remain safe as teachers and administrators. So what we're finding is with this proposal, there is a good amount of funding going towards the educational sector. There's actually $82 billion set aside for education and $10 billion set aside for childcare. Now that $10 billion is not very clear to me in what I've read so far, far as to what that means for someone who needs to go to work and needs childcare, but if they're able to provide some sort of economic support to individuals who still need to go to work, but they can't send their kid to school because the school is closed, this is actually something that could be very beneficial to working parents and individuals who are dealing with the stress associated with the pandemic while still being a parent and trying to get their kids properly educated. So hopefully this funding will go a long way in getting us through this pandemic. This bipartisan proposal also includes $160 billion to go to state and local governments. Now, this has been another sticking point associated with the bill, with the Democrats being more supportive and the Republicans being more resistant to this particular issue, but it seems like they might have compromised. We're trying to find a more reasonable set of funding going towards these entities. Now, as someone who works in the municipal government, understanding that right now, because sales tax has been depreciating, because individuals have had such a hard time being able to keep their businesses open because of state mandates and because of lockdown measures that have been put in place, it has definitely taken a toll on funding for local government. And when you think about this, if you don't have proper funding for your fire department, your police department, your public works department, then you might have more potholes, you might have less safety, and if you have a fire, you might not have the right support necessary. In addition, just the general administration of getting all these programs in place, for example, people who need unemployment benefits, that is an administration that deals in the state government. So if you do not have that state government agency operating, then they cannot issue the checks. Furthermore, if you need to build something at your home, or if you need to do something with a local government, if you don't have people working in local government to walk you through that or get you all the permits issued on time, that can actually really slow you down and try and address your issues. Or if you need a business license because you're trying to open up a new business in your new city, you need to be able to work with that local government to be able to do so. So it's important that these entities remain operational. They need to do so in the most fiscally responsible manner by respecting the taxpayer dollars, but it does seem beneficial that they're allocating money to these local governments and these state governments to make sure things move forward. Furthermore, a lot of these state agencies and a lot of these state institutions are going to be issuing the vaccine associated with the pandemic, and they're the ones who are running these public health departments to try and make sure that we maintain public health safety. So it's very important that they do have funding, but they do need to do so in, once again, a very fiscally responsible manner. One of the most significant things that has been left out of this proposal is a second round of economic stimulus payments directly to Americans. And what we found is back when the Congress passed the CARES Act, they issued $1,200 stimulus checks to millions of Americans at the cost of about $270 billion. Now, as someone who actually did not end up receiving my stimulus check, I'm very fortunate that I didn't necessarily need it financially. The administration of that was a bit of a challenge. So if you're right now still someone who hasn't received it, I'm very sorry for you and not having been able to do so. I'd recommend that you file a Form 3911, fax it directly to the IRS, and on the top, make sure you reference economic stimulus payment or economic impact payment, and hopefully they can trace that for you. Up until this point, I haven't had mine been able to be traced, but I just want to let you know that is one option you have. But what we're finding is that many legislators right now who have seen the proposal put forward by this moderate group of senators have said that they will not pass this piece of legislation or vote for it unless it includes a second round of economic impact payments. And many people are saying that this is the most quick way that we can get financial aid directly into the pockets of Americans. So hopefully they're able to do so if they're able to come up with some sort of compromise and make this happen moving forward. But one thing to bear in mind is that this still could become part of the proposal, but even if it is not, what we're going to see is that after the new president is inaugurated in January, President-elect Biden has said that he is going to push for yet another round of economic stimulus. So he has been quoted as saying that this first proposal that has been put forward by this group of moderate senators is simply a down payment on the larger bill that he wants passed long term. He has issued support and said that he supports the HEROES Act, which was passed by the House Democrats a number of times over the last few months, and that proposal probably does not seem likely to be passed by the Republicans in the Senate, so it's unlikely he'll be able to reach that far, but he's going to try and get at least a second round of economic stimulus payments into the pockets of Americans. Now, I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing because right now it's very difficult to know what the most fiscally responsible thing to do is, but it appears as though if you can get economic relief directly into the pockets of Americans, it will help them by either being able to pay their rent, put groceries on the table, or do other things that can secure their financial situation. So my hope is that if they do this, it will benefit you long term. I think it's important to ask ourselves, how did we get here to begin with? Obviously, we're facing an unprecedented pandemic that is impacting millions of individuals throughout the world, dealing with the health implications associated with the illness, the psychological issues associated with having to remain at home, and then dealing with the anxiety of uncertain future when it comes to your financial situation because you're unable to work or you've been laid off. So with that being the case, I think it's so important that our elected representatives in this type of time really should be acting. It has really been negligent on their part that they haven't done something secondarily after they passed the CARES Act back in March. Obviously, they need to do so that is in a way that is fiscally responsible and doesn't burden taxpayers long term, where we're basically trying to pay this off with our great-great-grandkids in the future. But at the same token, if there is a rainy day, it is now. This is unprecedented, where we're facing millions of people who are unemployed, people who are concerned about if they can keep a roof over their head, food on the table, and what the long-term implications are for their health, and also what they're going to do with their families when it comes to their educating their children or doing things just to be able to return to some semblance of normalcy, or we can go about enjoying our lives once again. So with that being said, I would strongly implore that if you have the opportunity to contact your congressional representative, your senator, your local representatives, just encourage them to do everything they can to pass a piece of legislation to help people through this process. I believe that is very important. Now, I normally don't get too emotional about this kind of stuff, but I really am very sad for individuals who've been forced to close their businesses, who have been put out of work, who do not know where their next paycheck is going to come from, and I empathize with them greatly because I believe a lot of the things we've had transpire up until this point have been unforced errors on humans, especially those in leadership. And I am very frustrated with people in certain leadership positions who have put in these measures such as closing businesses, but then they go and you find them attending those businesses, going to those restaurants, and not adhering to the safety protocols they've put in place. That level of hypocrisy is unacceptable, and for me, I do not find that to be very beneficial to their credibility when it comes to telling us how to act or how to respond. I believe confidently that people are going to do everything in a responsible manner. I believe people will continue to adhere to the safety protocols. They will do what's best for their common good, for their neighbor, their friend, their family, and for themselves. But we need to do so in a manner where we trust one another. And I believe the trust has been broken for a long time because we're so divided as a country along partisan lines. And I really want to encourage you to maintain a balanced perspective on this issue. It is so important that irrespective of your political affiliation, that you're doing everything you can to remain safe, but also that you're doing everything you can to secure your long-term financial future so that you can provide for your family and make a positive impact in your community. So my encouragement to you is, as we're going through this, we remember what these different elected representatives have done, and we can remove certain ones by voting them out of office and put in new ones later on. Now, I also want you to know is that ultimately elected people are just representatives. They are not the people who can fix everything. They are human with faults of their own. But we just can do everything we can personally to take personal responsibility in our lives to make wise decisions that are safe and wise decisions that allow us to position ourselves to continue to work, continue to provide for our families, and do everything we can to move forward along the lines to achieve our long-term goals. So I just want to encourage you that whatever you're able to do right now to encourage that level of dialogue with your friends, with your family members, to make sure that this is not a divisive issue, but an issue where we can just get through it, get through this season, and get ahead so we can all return to some semblance of normalcy where we can enjoy life once again and do everything we can to be able to provide for our families. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. If you wouldn't mind, please like the video. That would really mean a lot to myself personally, but also it'd push this video to other people who might need to hear it. Furthermore, if you have any questions, please comment down below. I'd love to interact with you, get to know you, answer any questions on your behalf, and do any research on your behalf when it comes to this particular issue, because it's a fast-moving topic that will change over time. Furthermore, if you have anything else, please do subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot to myself personally, as I do everything I can to create positive content that makes a positive impact in your life by encouraging you and myself to lead lives of meaning and purpose, all while maintaining balance and moderation. And if you do subscribe to the channel, please tap the notification bell. That will notify you every time I post a video, which I do on a weekly basis. Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your day. Talk to you next time.